The system is broken. America's founders built our government upon the separation of powers so that no one person could rule like a king. But these days, presidents are grabbing power like never before and pushing us to the brink of a constitutional crisis. That's the story, anyway, and there are lots of plausible arguments for it. But there's something else going on here, too. Because in a lot of cases, it's not that presidents are actually getting more powerful. It's that they're trying to fool us into thinking they are. America's separation of powers. Quick refresher course: Congress makes the laws, the president enforces the laws, and the courts interpret the laws. Straightforward enough, now we can all go home. Except one hitch. As we've all learned over the last decade, we've also got these things called executive orders, with which the president can kind of do whatever he wants. And while we don't know exactly how the founding fathers would react to that, our guess is that it'd be something like, what the f***? Or at least that'd be the case if this was the way executive orders actually work. But here's the thing, it isn't. To understand what's really going on here, you have to understand what the president's role actually entails. You probably think of the job as things like being commander-in-chief of the armed forces and giving big, inspiring speeches. And while that's part of it, being the head of the executive branch also involves a lot of tasks that are really, really, really boring. Yes, you're the leader of the free world, but you're also responsible for things like making sure everything's in tip-top shape over at the Department of Agriculture, which is harder than it sounds. It's in this capacity, as head of the executive branch of government and all its various departments and agencies, that the president gets to use executive orders. And spoiler alert, it's a lot less sexy than it seems. Executive orders can't be used to make new laws. They can't be used to spend taxpayer money that Congress didn't approve. And they can't override legislation that's already on the books. In fact, executive orders don't give presidents any additional powers at all. They just allow them to tell their employees in the executive branch how to do their jobs. And here's how mundane that can be. One of the first ever executive orders was George Washington asking his cabinet secretaries to send him progress reports, which, gotta say, ruins old George's mystique a little bit. And this was part of a broader pattern. The presidents that came from the founding generation barely used executive orders at all. In fact, our first 5 presidents issued a grand total of 15 of them over the course of more than 35 years. By contrast, Franklin Roosevelt issued about 300 of them a year. So, what changed? Well, a big part of the story is that because presidents can only use executive orders to implement powers they already have, either because the Constitution gave it to them or Congress did, the number of executive orders tends to increase when they're using those core powers most vigorously, as in wartime. So, for example, Abraham Lincoln issued more executive orders than any previous president, including one we know today as the Emancipation Proclamation. And just a few years later, Ulysses S. Grant issued more than 4 times as many as Lincoln as part of the Reconstruction of the South. And this is also part of the reason you'll see other wartime presidents like Woodrow Wilson and FDR towards the top of the list. And looking at this historical track record reveals a surprising trend. While you wouldn't necessarily know it from the media coverage, the use of executive orders has actually declined significantly over time. The first 4 presidents of the 20th century issued well over 4,000 of them across the span of 22 years. The first 4 presidents of the 21st century, less than a quarter as many. So what's going on here? If executive orders have actually become less common, why is everybody all of a sudden so worked up over them? Well, for one thing, in just the last year or so, the rate of executive orders is changing a little bit. But even still, the issue is less about the number of executive orders being issued than the kind of executive orders being issued. Here's what we mean. In 2014, President Obama announced that he would unilaterally offer protections against deportation for illegal immigrants whose children were American citizens. Congress had refused to do that. In 2017, President Trump signed an executive order prohibiting federal money from going to sanctuary cities that protected illegal immigrants from deportation. Congress had refused to do that. In 2022, President Biden announced that he was unilaterally forgiving student loan debt for tens of millions of Americans. Congress had refused to do that. What did all of these cases have in common? When they wound their way through the legal system, the courts ended up telling the president, "Hey, dummy, Congress refused to do that." We're paraphrasing. But in each of those cases, the courts found that each of those presidents had gone beyond their lawful powers, which leads us to a surprising truth about how modern presidents use executive orders. In a lot of cases, what looks like a power grab is also kind of a con. Presidents employ a lot of very talented lawyers. They know they're probably going to lose in court. But they also know that the moment where they sign the order in front of the cameras is going to get a lot more attention than the court case that invalidates it a year later. And even when they inevitably lose, well, they just get to blame the courts for stopping all their good ideas. Cynical? Yes. Effective? Unfortunately, probably also yes. But there's a bigger picture here. This kind of political gamesmanship can do a lot of damage to the country. For one thing, you can understand why it'd make voters disillusioned. The president comes into office, promises he's going to do everything they want, and then it turns out the whole thing is just theater. And not just because the courts can stop it, but also because any president can get rid of any other president's executive orders with the stroke of a pen. When President Trump took office for the first time, he quickly rescinded 9 of President Obama's executive orders. When President Biden got to the Oval Office, he revoked 34 of Trump's. In just his earliest days back in the White House in 2025, Trump rescinded 91 of Biden's. That's not a government. That's an Etch-a-Sketch. And all of this is the inevitable consequence of presidents choosing to go it alone. Yes, the process of getting a bill through Congress is slow and painful. It can take years. It usually requires compromise. But as a result, it's durable. It won't disappear with the next president. It can actually solve an issue for the long term. So, yeah, that's harder and less glamorous work than just signing a piece of paper. But don't we elect presidents to do hard things? To find the solutions no one else can? To put in the long hours? I mean, just think of Washington's work ethic.